All right. Welcome back to the Copywriters podcast with your host, the world's greatest copywriting coach, David Garfinkel. David, how you doing today?
I'm good, Nathan. How are you?
Fantastic, because I get to sit in on a special surprise today, so I'm super excited.
Well, me too. It's direct response copywriter Matt Rizvi. And Matt has worked with famous people known for being strong, independent thinkers who focus on the power of the individual. People like Dr. Ron Paul, the congressman from Texas, best-selling author and financial guru Pamela Yellen, and investment analyst Porter Stansberry. Matt sold millions with his copy. He's founder of dailycopywriter.com and the Daily Copywriter podcast, where I was a guest myself. And when I was getting ready to be in his show, I noticed on his website that he mentioned he uses a, quote, unique type of ethical copywriting, close quotes. Now that really intrigued me because I've always believed in ethical copywriting, but I don't think we spend nearly enough time talking about it, whether it's on this podcast or in copywriting at large. So I invited Matt on the Copywriters podcast to talk about it, and here he is. Matt, welcome, and thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me on, David. It's an honor to be on the Copywriters podcast. I've been listening to the show for a long time. So to have you on my show was a great pleasure. And then for you to invite me on, it was just mind blowing. I'm so excited to be here.
Thanks. Well, it seemed like such a natural fit to me to have you on, in the same way that it's totally natural for me to say this: copy is powerful. You're responsible for how you use what you hear on this podcast, and most of the time, common sense is all you need. But if you make extreme claims, and or if you're writing copy for offers in highly regulated industries like health and finance and business opportunity, you may want to get a legal review after you write and before you start using your copy. My larger clients do this all the time. So Matt, let's talk about ethical copywriting. What is your definition of ethical copywriting, and why is it important?
Well, for starters, I think that's the perfect segue, because your disclaimer there, I think, is a great example of ethical copywriting, letting the audience know kind of the full details and making sure they don't get misled by anything. And when it comes to ethical copywriting, I really look at it, there's two facets of it. For me, it's one, picking products and services that as a copywriter you're going to promote that are actually good for the consumer, products that you believe in and are high quality. So that's the first part of ethical copywriting, is making sure that you're promoting things that you believe in, you actually would want to use yourself.
Okay.
The other part to that is, when writing the copy, making claims that are genuine, they're based in fact, and you're not saying anything that's just untrue about the products. So those are really the two big parts for me when it comes to my own moral compass in deciding, making decisions in copy. Am I picking a good product or service that I think is actually right? Or, I'm not, if for example, if you're really against global warming, you might not want to promote a financial newsletter that sells oil stocks, for example.
Sure.
Or if you're against the opioid epidemic, selling Oxycontin might not be your thing, right?
Right.
So, and then just, making claims that actually fall in line with facts, with science, that have proof and are based in reality, not just hypotheticals.
Okay, that's good. So in a nutshell, being true to yourself and being true to your customers, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so I'm curious, being sort of gray-haired, I would call you a relatively young man, yet you've had a lot of experience in very few years. What events or experiences led you to focus on ethical copywriting, to be willing to talk about it?
Sure. So I got started in copywriting immediately after college, and I was lucky enough to work at Agora and their division at Stansberry Research. And one of the first experiences that I really kind of thought about it this way was, there was a company called Truth in Advertising, and they wrote a very damaging report about us. Specifically, they called out how some of our promotions were using testimonials, and they were going through promotions, and they saw that basically we had these testimonials, and in some promotions they came from like one person's name, and then on another promotion they came from a different person's name. And at the time, like our legal team, said that was fine. Like we were changing people's names for, their own privacy reasons. But we also we weren't consistent about it, and we were also doing things like adding people's location, even though we didn't know their location, like saying, "Oh, Jack from Minnesota says," but we didn't actually know he was from Minnesota. Again, our legal team was like, "Oh, well, that's not material to the buying decision." But at the same time, it's not, it doesn't make people feel good if they actually knew that stuff. And so,
Okay, let me stop, because
Sure.
I know what you're saying, but I want to make sure our listeners understand. These were real testimonials from real people. They weren't doctored testimonials.
That's correct.
But for privacy reasons, you would change the name, and sometimes the left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing, so you'd have different names and different testimonials, sometimes different locations. And this organization called Truth in Advertising came at you about that.
Exactly. Yep. And so we had a very long talk with the founder and CEO at the time, Porter Stansberry. I think he later came back as CEO, but the founder, you got, this was something, this was a very big deal. He sat down all the copywriters. We talked about this. Many emails were sent out, and we decided as a company, we didn't want to just stick with what we could say legally. We wanted to go beyond the legal requirements of saying things in copy and making sure that, people, we were doing the right thing by our customers when we were putting, whether it's testimonials or claims or anything like that, in copy. So that was definitely one of the big things that really stuck with me. And then I think just, later on, these days, a lot of the Agora affiliates have just gotten in trouble on Facebook, and Agora in general has, for the most part, right now been blacklisted from a lot of different ad providers like Facebook and such. So it's really hard. It's really hard for them to get reach now because of claims and just getting ads banned. And so that in itself as well has pushed me more to make sure I'm compliant and writing copy that everyone feels good about.
Okay, thanks for being so open about that, and that's really worth thinking about. Whether you're writing for a large company like Agora, and I'll disclose Agora Financial is one of my clients, and I consider them very ethical. And of course, there are other people who have different feelings about it, or whether you're writing for your own business. And I also have my own business, so I know from there I have a lot of clients who have medium-sized businesses, 7-figure, 8-figure businesses too. So a lot of copywriters might be less than ethical in the way they write. Some of them may be aware of it, some may not. Just for listeners who aren't really up to speed on this issue, okay, you've already talked about not just doing what's legal, but doing what's right. Could you give us a close-up look at what less than ethical copywriting looks like from your point of view?
Sure. Yeah. Like it is a subjective thing, but I think when I imagine copywriting that's less than ethical, I think a lot of times as copywriters, we want to avoid disclosure when there's important things that should be disclosed that that could be important to the buying decision. For example, if you're in the health space and you're citing statistics from a study, and if the study was done on rats, that's a very important distinction to make versus if it was a study based on humans, right? But you might just focus on the results of the study and not actually tell someone, hey, it was a study on rats. And another thing that I hear about all the time, especially in the financial world, is that a editor's track record doesn't matter. And that idea comes from the fact that a lot of times copywriters can just avoid talking about a editor's actual results and just focus on maybe a strategy that they use, and then talk about other people who've done that successfully, or do like back testing, which is basically like, oh, if you had used his approach for the past 30 years, you could have found this gain and this gain, and really just cherry pick all that stuff. So it's really up to the copywriter can make and someone look as good as they want, regardless of the person's actual results and the results that the customer will actually experience.
Oh, that's great. So you mentioned the whole thing about ethics is subjective, and I agree. Um, People have different definitions, different boundaries, different ways of looking at it. I'm really interested in yours. Could you walk us through a promo you did and share maybe 2 or 3 decisions on copy decisions that you made to stay on the right side of being ethical?
Sure. And I would like to say too that I think there's people will probably think that some of the stuff that I do might not be ethical. Like I said, it's very subjective, and you just have to follow your own moral compass. When I was writing a promo recently, it was for a product where the editor recommends these really, really small stocks, micro cap stocks that are like under $150 million in total value. So they're really tiny, but they have tremendous upside. And I was fortunate enough where the editor who I'm working with, he actually does have a really good track record. So I didn't have to, when making those decisions about all the examples that I would really include in the promotion, I really tried to avoid using hypothetical examples like, hey, if you had gotten in on Uber before it went public, you could have made X amount of money, right? Because
Right.
none of these editors actually got in on Uber. Copywriters just imply that, oh, if you sign up for the service, you're going to get on the next Uber, you're going to get on the next Airbnb or Slack or something like that. But so focusing on his actual track record and using the real examples, which meant, getting on the phone with him and spending hours on the phone and learning his actual trading history, and then focusing on those. But, some of them weren't always fantastic, I think. So an example was in the lead of the promo, there was he had this massive gain that he saw. He got in on a private placement opportunity. He invested his own money in the stock. Within 2 months, it was up 35x after it went public. And a lot of copywriters would have just left it at that. Oh, he invested, went up 35x. But the editor who I was working with didn't actually, when he sold, he didn't lock in that 35x gain. So in the copy, I also disclosed, yes, it went up 35x, but when he cashed out, he made an 1100% gain, which 1100% ain't nothing to sneeze at. But, I wasn't just I didn't just focus on the 35x. I also wanted to make sure that we disclosed, since this was a real trade with his actual money, the real gain that the editor made.
That's great. Keep going, but I just want to tell you that's great. And you're right. A lot of people would say, "Hey, man, this guy made 35x on his investment," and just leave it there because that's the most impressive thing. I do want to hear about more decisions, but something's occurring to me. I think there's sort of a balance between the most impressive, awesome thing you can say on the one hand, and the most fair-minded, authentic, disclosing thing you can say on the other hand. Don't you feel that a lot of people don't pay as much attention to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as a copywriter, you do want, I obviously still cherry pick. I'm not talking about the big losers in his portfolio, and I'm not, it is copy, so I wouldn't call the copy completely objective, evaluation of his track record. But especially when you're working with someone and it was a real trade and he actually did close out the position, that was just a line for me of where we wanted to make sure that was disclosed. Everyone has to make their own decision on that, but I think if they are real trades like that, again, there were other parts in the copy too where just when talking about with the editor, there were recommendations he had where the gains were really big for subscribers at first, but when he didn't close out the position at those big gains, they ended up like crashing afterwards. But we disclose that in the copy, and you can frame that and position that in a way where it's where it doesn't sound like terrible. Like people did get to see these huge gains, and the fact that it crashed later on after he even locked it in isn't relevant. So we we still talked about the big gains he made. People locked in their trade, and then the stock still crashed later. We told people that, but the fact is, people still made a lot of money on the trade. So it wasn't. I don't think it hurt the copy like that. If anything, I think it increases the believability, because I don't think anyone believes that all the trades that people are going to make are just going to go up to the moon and never come down. So I think it builds trust with the listener, which is also just as well when dealing with these really small, tiny investments. We also wanted to make sure we were disclosing, hey, these are risky. A lot of these may go to zero, but some will go to the moon. And so having kind of an even-handed approach like that, and I think not having some respect for the intelligence of your audience, and knowing that with risk comes reward, and you shouldn't put all your money into just one or two stocks. I think that positioning in that way makes it more believable. It makes you more credible. And I think it doesn't hurt the copy nearly as much as a lot of people think it does.
Yeah, I'm reminded of a promo I went over on it was an Agora copy call, and it was this just wild ass promo for foreign exchange trading that had done very well on ClickBank. And one of the things, and I'm probably going to get these numbers a little wrong, but the essence of what I'm saying is right. One of the claims in there is you can between double and quadruple your money every week. So I thought, I don't know with compounding how true that's going to be. So I'm not the best at math, but I think I figured it out. I basically took 2 to the power of 51 or something like that with $1,000. So if you started with $1,000 and you doubled it every week, you'd end up with something like $277 billion at the end of the year. That's not very believable.
Right. And why is a person selling info products if they're making that much money?
Now, that's a good question. So I do want to talk about mentoring. Now, I'm a mentor. I know that you have Cubs that you mentor also. And I was wondering, in terms, especially since you are freely and I would say correctly admitting that ethics is in many ways a very subjective and personal choice, what are some tips and guidelines that you share with them to stay ethical?
Sure. So there's two kind of benchmarks, and they're a little similar, but the way I like to think about it is if the customer knew the full truth behind your promotion, if they knew everything that you knew about what you're writing about, if they knew the truth behind the claim and the things that you may not be disclosing, would they be angry? Would they be upset? A lot of times, when we're kind of pushing that line, I think the answer is yes, and they would be disappointed. And, that experience that I had a long time ago with truth in advertising, if you're doing that kind of stuff, eventually some things will come out and people will be upset, and it can really harm your credibility. So just thinking about it like that, assuming that people will find out, even though you don't think they will. And the other thing I just like to think about is, if I gave this promotion to my grandmother and she read it, would she be proud of me? So I think those two things, if the customer knew all the details that I know behind the promo and the claims, would they be angry or disappointed? And would my grandma be proud of me based on the copy that I'm writing? If I usually follow those two guidelines, my copy is pretty safe.
Yeah, I really like those because it still keeps it in the realm of the personal. You sort of own it. If customers found out, how would I feel if everything was out there? If someone in my family, my grandmother, found this out, would I be ashamed, or would she be proud of me? I think that's a really good way to look at it. Now, I want to talk, I guess this would be called to give the devil his due. I want to talk about the upside of unethical copy. In the short run, it can bring in windfalls. If you make claims that are simply not true but very appealing, if you leave out huge chunks of stuff, you can make a lot of money really fast. But in the long term, sometimes, usually, there are consequences. And I recently heard about a guy who was a household name in direct marketing, not in the financial business, but more in the business opportunity space. About 20 years ago, he got hit for a huge fine with his marketing, and he's all but disappeared from the scene. So could you talk a little bit about short-term profits versus long-term profits with ethical copywriting? And also, and I think we talked about this when we met for coffee, because you live in San Francisco as I do. People should know that. Not that it matters, but that's how we met for coffee. The short-term versus long-term profitability and I would call it the extra mile you have to go sometimes if you're holding yourself to a consistent ethical standard in order to make it work, in order to make it convert.
Yeah, absolutely. So there, without a doubt, being more aggressive with your claims and pushing that ethical line can help you make, increase conversions. You're probably going to have a promo that, will likely do better in the short term in bringing in, whether that's, new front end names or, back end promotions that sell tens of millions of dollars. But you got to balance that, and it's hard as a copywriter because copywriters aren't always incentivized to do what's in the best interest of the business. We get royalties, and so that those are usually either on gross or net refunds. So if it's net refunds, then you are thinking, okay, I want to make sure that the claims are tame enough where when someone signs up, when they do see the real track record, that they're not going to immediately go out and cancel. I've seen plenty of very aggressive promos on the back end go out that were luckily net refund, and they did very, very well at the beginning, but the refund rate was through the roof, and the copywriter didn't make nearly as much money as they thought they would. So creating incentives that way, I think, is important. But yeah, it's definitely easier to be aggressive with the claims and to go out and just think about, the biggest possible, the best possible way you can position something, or in finance, just looking at the anomalies in the marketplace that you could just highlight, whether that's like, these tiny startups that go to the moon, even though those won't be the experience of the customer. The challenge really, it's definitely much harder to be more ethical in the copywriting because it takes a lot more time to find those stories that are true and real and legitimate with your customer and your client, and in digging in and finding those ones that are just as attractive, but they're also based in reality. So as I was mentioning earlier, basically anytime I start writing a promo with a client, I sit down and I will get on spend at least probably 2 hours on the phone with them on a Zoom call like this, where I record everything, and I want to know their life story. I want to go way, way, way back, their hero's journey. I want to know every single example of, profitable trade that they've had, how they found out about it, the exact situation. When I wrote the promo I was alluding to earlier, it was just littered with all these real examples of trades he had done that were hundreds and thousands of percent gains. And I didn't have to have hypotheticals for those, but because to find those, I had to spend a lot of time actually talking with the client, and really following up with them on questions. When I first started copywriting, one of my mentors at Stansberry, Justin Gershwin, he was one of he still is one of their best back-end copywriter. And one of the skills that I noticed he was just able to find these details from speaking with editors that almost like no one else would find. And it was really, I could tell it was just, he was a great interviewer, and he had the skill to ask the right questions and then follow up with those questions to get down into the nitty gritty and find those gems that really can carry your promotion, instead of just, I think a lot of copywriters don't spend enough time talking to their clients, and instead just kind of go out on Google and find these examples that aren't really relevant or true to the actual product they're writing for.
Yeah. So there, I love everything you just said. I agree with it all. And I just want to add a couple things, sort of about, well, not add, but like follow up on a couple things. One is the copywriter who's good at interviewing. I mean, I've been interviewing people for 50 years. Okay. Like when I was in high school in newspaper, and I've gotten better at it over the years. I mean, I would hope so. I am a slow learner, but I get there. And one of the things I found is, so there's asking questions. That's like step one. And some people have trouble with that. Step two is listening. And some people figure, if I can basically fake listening, I got it. But step three is making the person feel like they're being heard. And I don't even know how to describe how to do that, but I know that when you do that, that's where the magic happens in an interview. Any thoughts yourself? Because, to spend 2 hours on the phone with somebody, where you're actively asking about their life and thinking about it, that's a lot of time, and you should probably be getting great dividends from those conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And it could be mentally exhausting, to not just ask the questions, but have that active listening approach and constantly be thinking of follow-up questions that are relevant to what the person just asked. And it can be challenging because often the customers and clients you're working with don't really know what makes good copy. And so there might be a story that they think is just boring. They don't think it's relevant. And they might just be sitting on this gold mine, and not getting to those details. So being able to ask, just very open-ended questions where you kind of get them to feel comfortable and share the things that might not sound intriguing to them, but are really the gems that can make or break a promo.
Okay, that's really good. The other thing I want to say is, I'm wondering if there are some people who are very practical. They may be ethical people, but they're very practical, and they're thinking that we are actually standing right now on the street corner of Ivory Tower and Happy Abstraction. But I want to take this conversation right across the town to the corner of commerce and finance, because there's a saying among people who've actually made money: it's not how much money you make, it's how much you keep. And usually they're talking about taxes or investment. But what I'm talking is about refund rates and a paid stay in Club Fed. You don't really get to keep the money if the customers want it back, or if the government has other ideas for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like you said, it's easy to talk from these ivory towers and be very principled if you don't necessarily have skin in the game. But on that same the other side of the coin, like you said, if you're incentivized by refund rates, then you do have skin in the game, and it's much more important that the customers are happy. Also, just as a copywriter, you have to think about the long-term business of the client you're working with. If you want, recurring business, if they get the short of the stick where there's a lot of money up front, but it really damages the credibility with their list, they're going to be much more skeptical about working with you in the future. And really, businesses want copywriters who think about what's in the best interest of their business. And if you do that, then they're going to compensate you accordingly. And also, just specifically with publishing business, info publishing, uh, the business is really based on recurring revenue. You get people in the door. Most of the time, you're not making money on that front end sale. You're breaking even, and you're hoping that they buy a newsletter that's going to bring in money, not just for right now, but for years to come. And if you write copy that doesn't fulfill the promises that you make in it, and people feel like you're a sleazy salesman who just wanted that quick buck, they're not going to stick around, and you're going to be on this treadmill where you're constantly having to bring in new names just to just to burn them and churn them. And it can really be put pressure on the business owner, and the copywriters, because they feel like the list is constantly shrinking, and then they have to keep growing it and then monetize the list. But everything works better when you have a big happy customer base who wants to keep spending money with you year after year.
Yeah, well, thanks. I feel like together we've made about the best real world case for ethical copywriting we could. And, you know, for people watching and listening, now it's up to you. You got to decide. Matt, could I ask you to move your head about other way? Yeah, there you go. Okay.
There we go.
want
Yeah,
to show your URL for our YouTube viewers. So you have a website called dailycopywriter.com.
that's correct. So that's you can get I write an email newsletter, and that's published daily, as the name implies. So you can sign up there. I give out daily copywriting tips, and then I'm also launching a podcast, which David is on. Depending on when this broadcast actually comes out, it might already be launched. It's coming out any day now. So if you'd like to sign up for the list and get alerts on when the new podcast episodes come out, dailycopywriter.com. And then if you're interested in working with me in a professional capacity, you can just check out more information about me as a copywriter at mattrizvi.com.
Yeah, MATTRIZ or Z for our British friends and Canadian friends, VI.com. And yeah, we'll put that in the show notes too, so people can find it there in case they're driving or, you know, sitting in their zero gravity tank watching this on YouTube above their head or something like that. All right, Matt, thank you. This has been wonderful. I really appreciate it. Great.
Yeah, I've had a blast. Thank you so much, David.
All right. Thank you both for a very compelling conversation that I think a lot of marketers and copywriters don't pay enough attention to. And until next time, if you want to get more episodes of this podcast, you can check it out over at copywriterspodcast.com, and we'll catch you later.